ready when Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. I've just finished filming my November wrap-up, and here I am doing my November Bail wrap-up. I typically have so many bails that I put them in a separate video, because I think if I started my monthly wrap-up with my numerous bails, plus the books I hated, plus the books I didn't like, most of you would want to stop watching the video before I got to talking about the books that I liked. So, if you're into hearing me give my honest and sometimes snarky assessment of books and why I didn't finish reading them, please stick around. And if you're worried that I might be rude to one of your favorite books, please have a look at the books mentioned in the show notes and decide whether you want to listen. But I try to be fair, but I also enjoy being catty. So the first book that I bailed on this month was early in the month, and that was the Nigerian novel Stay With Me by... Wow, did I ever massacre the pronunciation? The author's name is Ayobami Adebayo. And I was enjoying this novel so much, I think I had listened to almost half of it on audio. And I made a few comments on Friday Reads that the narrator's voice, which I had experienced previously on a book of short stories, and what didn't really connect with deeply, but when she'd do the angry scenes, her voice would almost scare me. But that wasn't why I bailed, but it got to a certain point where the story got so emotionally complex that I was reacting more to her voice than I think I was reacting to the female protagonist, and I couldn't separate those two things out. I didn't have an ebook or a paper book, and I just thought, I think this is a wonderful novel, but the audiobook isn't for me. So I bailed, and I will go back, but I'll probably leave it for a year or two just so I can get that woman's voice out of my head. I didn't hate her voice, but it couldn't take me to the places where I think the protagonist wanted to take me. Does that make sense? I'm very sensitive about my audio narrator voices, and this one just wasn't quite enough of a match to carry me through to the end. That wasn't so catty, was it? This one was sad for me because I loved her debut novel last year, Fiona Melrose's second novel, Johannesburg. This should have been the perfect storm of a 5-star read for me because I loved Fiona Melrose's debut called Midwinter, which came out last year. And this second novel is set in South Africa, which is a place near and dear to my heart. And it was a story that was a homage to Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, which is why I reread Mrs. Dalloway recently for the 4th time. Or was it the 3rd time? Anyway, doesn't matter. I should be rereading it every year. And the story is set on the day of Nelson Mandela's death, and Nelson Mandela is my hero. But I bailed. Now, maybe that perfect storm equaled too much pressure to put on this novel, or maybe, like many second novels, suffered from second novel syndrome, but I just felt like, compared to her first novel, where the characters just jumped off the page, they were so vivid that these characters just would not budge and did not come alive for me. So after about, I don't remember how many chapters I read, but not too many, I wasn't feeling it and bailed. The next one was an Irish novel by Sally Rooney, Conversation with Friends, which I started on audio. I enjoyed the audio narration, but the story was too superficial for me, and the problems being experienced by these people were problems that I don't care about at my age. I think it's a novel for younger people like Eric Carl Anderson, who enjoyed it far more than I did, but he said he had similar misgivings to me, and he stuck it out and appreciated it by the end. Maybe where I differ with him and many readers is, if a book doesn't get good until after the halfway point, for me that's a failure of a book. I'm sorry. So, no, I bailed. The next two are the two bails for my Nonfiction November, which ended up being my Nonfiction Novexit, One was Founding Grammars, How Early America's War Over Words Shaped Today's Language by Rosemary Ostler, a book that I had sitting on my shelf for a few years. I'm a grammar geek. As an ESL teacher, I'm a grammar geek, and I'm deeply interested in the history of grammar, and I thought it would be right up my alley, but like most nonfiction, it was terribly written. I can't believe how boring the prose was. I couldn't do it. The next book was The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. And I heard about this book. I heard quite a bit about this book, and the story was so interesting to me. But what I soon realized was what I heard about this book was all I wanted to know about this book. Like so much nonfiction, I didn't care about all the granular detail. And especially this writer employed novelization techniques. These are not famous people. These are employees who suffered horrible fates because they were licking their radium brushes as they were painting on the watch dials. It doesn't matter whether they were famous or not. She would write sentences like, she came out of her front door and she was wearing a blue scarf with gray slacks. It's like, really? In 1906 or whenever it was set? That's just bullshit. I hate that kind of nonfiction writing. You don't know that. Don't make shit up. Especially to pad a narrative that there was a magazine article's worth of a story here, and she padded it with all this fictional gobbledygook, so I bailed. The next one I started on audio when I very briefly just toyed with the idea of, I toyed with Tom Toppling, The Resurrection of Joan Ashby by Charisse Wallace. I see here it's got an average rating on Goodreads of 3.98. So lots of people liked it a lot. Maybe I should go back and try it as a text, but the audiobook, while it started out quite compellingly, soon lost my interest, but I chalked that up to the writing, or like at first I thought a novel about a woman who becomes, as a young woman, becomes a best-selling writer and then gets married and disappears from the literary world for 30 years could be absolutely fascinating. The more I thought about it and listened to it, I thought, well, that's actually quite boring. So soon after she was wooed by her soon-to-be husband and got married, I lost interest.